Hey everybody, welcome back to Planet Zoo. This is going to be my last video of the beta because the beta is going to end in a few hours from now, but by the time this goes live it's definitely long over. So the next Planet Zoo videos you'll see on my channel are going to be in a few weeks when the full game goes live, which is actually kind of a good thing because I'm gonna need those few weeks to not play this game anymore because it has kind of taken over my life. Even my parents sent me a very concerned text about my upload rate, which is pretty unusually high. Anyway, you probably don't want to hear me talk about that. Instead, I should probably talk about the habitat that I'm building in this video, which is going to be for the Formosan Black Bears. Now, I know that I was already building a habitat for bears in the last episode. I know, it's not going to be great YouTuber thumbnail clickbait. There's no amazing megafauna like lions or tigers. No, it's just going to be Formosan Black Bears. No offense to the Black Bears, but I have to say, they were the only thing that I could actually afford, because as you can see, my credits aren't that high, and this game has really kind of made me lose faith in humanity, because people put animals on the trade center for ridiculous price tags. I've seen peafowls for 10,000 conservation credits, like, why? So yeah, I couldn't really afford anything but these black bears. I decided to get them when I could because I do like them, they're pretty cute. And also, and this is maybe more important in my case, I like the fact that they're from Taiwan, and this gave me some ideas for theming that I haven't really tried before. And you're probably already getting an idea of what I'm going for here if you have a decent knowledge of Chinese architecture and things like that. At the moment, I'm working on a moon bridge, which is originally a bridge designed from China, which was supposed to be built like this so that boats could pass underneath it. But it also has some added advantages of having no slope necessary to go toward the bridge because it is quite steep on the sides, so you don't need a lot of space for it. And also, let's be honest, they look pretty cool. Now, it may not be that obvious that I'm going for a Chinese theme for this habitat, but I will. Taiwan has a very unique mixed architectural history. There are indigenous traditions, and it's been ruled as a colony by the Dutch, Spanish, Chinese and Japanese, and there are all kinds of leftovers of this. Not to mention that it exists in kind of an iffy political state at the moment. But regardless of all this, there really is a lot that you can see in Taiwan. As far as I'm aware, I've actually never been there myself, even though I would like to go there. But I decided to go for Chinese architecture because it's really the most common, and you find a lot of Chinese architecture there. And it's something that I wanted to try in general. And given the fact that Formosan Black Bears are from Taiwan, it's pretty relevant, I think. Speaking of which, I was wondering what Formosan meant actually exactly, and turns out that it does refer to the indigenous people of Taiwan and their language and culture. Which makes sense. Actually, my first encounter with this term was Formosan Aboriginal Cultural Village, which is a theme park in Taiwan. And given my theme park background, I used to be interested in that because it's quite an interesting park that has a Vekoma SLC with really cool theming around it. But yeah, I'm going way off topic here. That is, in any case, what the bears are from and what I was inspired by for this habitat. Now, if you've been following me on Twitter, which, by the way, I have Twitter, and if you don't follow me yet, you can find me in a link in the description, or just find me yourself. My name is Silv, basically the exact same as on all platforms ever. But yeah, I've been posting a bunch about my philosophy behind habitats and what I think they should be like. And personally, what inspired me for this habitat, and what I'll probably try to stick to for all of my future habitats as well, is to try and provide a combination of the nature and culture of whatever country or region the animals are from. But I do want to be very strictly separating the human and the natural elements of this. So I want to make sure that I try to make the nature as authentic as possible for the animal inhabitants, but at the same time try to have authentic culture for human visitors. And this is an idea that generally was inspired by a visit to Paididaiza. A lot of people have been asking me about whether I've actually been to that park, which, yes, I have. You can stop asking me that. And while I think the theming is really beautiful, it's a zoo with a lot of themed areas representing different parts of the world, and supposedly all of the buildings have even been designed with help from architects and materials from all these different places, to be as authentic as possible. And this is all really beautiful, but at the same time, I think there's a sort of mismatch, a sort of dissonance between all of this beautiful scenery and the animals on the other hand. For one example, there's a tiger exhibit, which is in a Southeast Asian style temple building, which is really cool. It's a really beautiful building, but at the same time, they just put the tigers in the middle of this building, and it doesn't really provide the natural surroundings like trees and enrichments that these tigers need, I think. At least as far as I'm aware. It's really kind of shoehorning these animals into structures that are made by and for humans, which to me is kind of problematic. So I'd like to take that idea of representing these cultures from all over the world and adding this animal and even a foliage element to it, but at the same time trying to separate them a bit more and establish these boundaries between nature and human a bit better. And for this habitat, I think you can already kind of see that in a sense that I will be building a lot of Chinese-inspired structures, like the bridge and like the pavilion, which I'm currently working on, which I'll get to in a minute. But at the same time, I want to restrict these to the guest areas only, which I think makes more sense even from a cultural standpoint, because these pavilions, for instance, the one that I'm working on right now, is traditionally used in Chinese gardens as a real viewing spot, to be inside, to view the garden from, to provide a center point for gardens for humans. And while I think the idea to perhaps turn it into a shelter for animals is tempting, I think that that's kind of kitsch and definitely doesn't matter to the animal welfare at all, because animals can't really, benefit in any way from being in a very flashy, beautiful structure that's very detailed and made to be nice to humans. So, on the topic of this pavilion, actually, to bring it back a little bit, this is my first try to kill myself playing this game, because God, this was really difficult. For some reason, I had the idea to build a Chinese pavilion in the game, and obviously, since there is no Chinese theme, at least not in the beta, and it hasn't been confirmed for the full game either, although I do secretly hope and kind of think there will be one, given the fact that there is Asian-sounding music in the soundtrack of the game. But anyway, I wanted to build one of these pavilions myself, and this turned out to be quite a difficult quest. For one, because the pieces are very limited, so I ended up using some limestone corner pieces to build these curved dividers for the roof. I ended up building 6 of these because I wanted to make this a hexagon-shaped Chinese pavilion. There are many different shapes and sizes of these sorts of pavilions, but personally I really like the hexagon-shaped ones with the curved roofs. For me that feels like the right balance. And then between these, there will be, in real life, tiled roofs that curve to the sides of these and also curve inwards themselves a little bit to create these really cool curved structures. And this was really difficult to recreate in-game because we also don't have any separate tile roof pieces. So the piece that I ended up using for this tiled roof is actually the full stop from the alphabet setting, or the alphabet set, I suppose, of scenery pieces, which in hindsight, I have to spoil, was a terrible idea, because while I was building this whole structure, I didn't really test this, but as soon as I finished the structure and I zoomed out a bit, I realized that the render distance of these pieces is abysmal, and as soon as you zoomed out a bit, the whole structure would completely disappear, which I'll get to fixing in a minute. But yeah, that made using these pieces kind of impractical. So, as good as I think it looks, because it does look surprisingly convincing, I think, for a tile roof with these sort of concrete dividing decoration elements. I think it looks quite decent, but once you zoom out, the whole thing disappears. So eventually I ended up having to sink some larger pieces in there, which disappear less quickly, just to make sort of an LOD for this whole pavilion, which is something that I'll do in a minute once I'm done with these pillars and the fence around the pavilion as well. Now, I always get a lot of comments from people why I'm not just using a 3D modeling program to do some stuff that I do, and for this one I was definitely feeling like that, because Realistically, what I ended up doing is making a lower detail version of this pavilion right underneath the existing one, just to make sure that it doesn't completely disappear when you zoom out, which is something that if you're working on game design and you're making 3D models, you have to provide these LODs to them. So yeah, maybe I did go into a 3D model development direction with this one. Aside from that though, I do feel like this was surprisingly easy. A lot of it just comes down to the rotational symmetry and making a good cutout of the shape of the building that you want before you build anything else, because the way that it works is just you make one side and then you copy it over to the other side and start rotating it to create the whole structure. So in this case, since I was building a hexagon shaped pavilion, I had to make sure to build 1/6 of the pavilion, just finish that and copy it over to the other side and then rotate it to fill in the other 5 parts of the pavilion. Unfortunately, it was a little bit off-grid, so fitting these pieces together without leaving any gaps between them was a bit difficult, but in the end, I think it connects quite seamlessly, and whatever the case, I'm really happy with how this turned out. It definitely turned out a bit better than I was expecting, and I say that with full experience of trying to make Asian roofs in a Planet game, since I tried to do the same for Fantasy Valley in Planet Coaster, which I also think turned out a little bit less nice than this building, and I didn't even dare at the time to try and build a Chinese pavilion like this with 6 sides, so definitely happy that I tried this and that it worked out as well as it did, if not just for the one little issue that it disappears a bit too quickly when you zoom out. But I think the lower detail elements that I added underneath these roof tiles do make up for that, and once you zoom out you just basically see a lower detail version of this pavilion. Now around this, one side of it will be the habitat and the other side, which is here, will be a garden, and there aren't going to be any exhibits or buildings in this space. I'm really just trying to provide this pavilion with a Chinese style garden context, just because I think that's what realistically these kinds of pavilions should fit into, which is also, I suppose, inspired a bit by Paidi Daiza. I have to admit, as much as I've made videos on Japanese gardens, I don't really have the experience on Chinese gardens that I do for the Japanese ones. I haven't traveled to China, I haven't been to as many real Chinese gardens as I have for Japanese gardens, so really can't speak with as much authority here. But in the end, I do want to create a garden setting for this pavilion, because you'll very commonly find these kinds of pavilions in traditional Chinese gardens. And in fact, I think there are a lot of similarities between Chinese and Japanese gardens. If you look overall, they are both meant to be a sort of miniature replica of a natural landscape, using a lot of rock work and bushes and trees, and also very zigzaggy winding paths and water elements to try and create a sort of smaller natural landscape, which I think is really cool and what I like about Japanese gardens in the first place. And hell, I think in Planet Zoo specifically, a lot of the foliage and rock work and pathways that work for Japanese gardens could just as easily work for Chinese gardens as well. Really, a major difference that I tried to incorporate a bit here as well is that while Japanese gardens, even though there are many different types, are really overall meant to be walked through, and they don't really feature as much architecture, whereas Chinese gardens typically tend to feature many more buildings and are much more seen from inside a building setting rather than strolled through as you do with many Japanese strolling gardens or tea gardens or lake-based gardens. So that's, I guess, a major difference. But for both of these, I think there's a fair set of scenery out there in the game to make these things. Not to mention that the cherry blossom tree is absolutely beautiful, and I tried to use this conservatively, so there's only one cherry blossom tree, which is in that very strategic position at this junction of all of these paths at the end of the bridge, which I think works out quite well. But yeah, that is a really beautiful tree, probably my favorite one in the game. Obviously they're really beautiful in real life, but this rendition in the game is just so beautifully pink. I really can't put it in a different way. It's just really nice to look at, and I think it even goes very well with the path textures of this kind of assorted cobblestone path. And the same goes for a lot of the other foliage. I'm not as big a fan of the Japanese maple. They've definitely gone for more of an orangey color, whereas I do like the dark red, purple-ish almost color that they often have in real life. But yeah, I ended up putting some Japanese maples in there as well. Might not be the most Chinese thing, but at the same time it just works for the overall look of the garden. Not to mention that at the end of the day, you can't really make a completely authentic Japanese or Chinese gardens. These things are very much based on ceremonial and cultural traditions, which you can never really recreate yourself, especially me just being a dumb Westerner. So it's really all just inspired by it and trying to take the aesthetic and mold it into a zoo here. Although at the same time, I'm really trying to keep the garden-esque elements to just the path areas and keep the actual habitat of the bears as natural as possible. Speaking of which, I actually skipped through a whole section of me working on the habitat itself. Just because I didn't record it, it was a lot of me looking around the habitat, trying to do some stuff, trying to figure out how I wanted to build it. It didn't work as well for a time-lapse, but yeah, in the meantime I did work on the habitat itself as well. Now here, I'm kind of running behind. I started working on some roof sets, and this is really giving me some Fantasy Valley flashbacks because I tried making pretty much the exact same roof set in Fantasy Valley. A combination of 3 main roof pieces to make these Asian typical curved roofs with, a straight piece with a slight curve to it, and a larger steep piece to try and fill in larger roof structures. And finally, the most difficult thing to get right, the corner piece, which curves upward, and which is quite difficult to make it work. But for this one, at least, I learned from the mistakes that I made on the Pavilion. So I made it out of different pieces that I tested beforehand and really wouldn't disappear too quickly. And the piece that I ended up going with to make the roof tiles out of is the letter E. So that's kind of a meme, honestly. But yeah, it just worked out that the E was the best shape to make these roof tiles out of. So I ended up going with the E. And then for the corners, the stone sections, I'm just taking some limestone pillars. Now, the thing about these types of Asian roofs is that I can really only try to imitate the look that these roofs have from a distance, because obviously I don't have actual roof tiles, but Chinese and Japanese roof tiles are very similar. They're very different from most Western roof tiles in that you've got round cap pieces and then round valley pieces, and they both intermingle. It's like a mix of the two of them. So often if you look at an Asian roof, you can find at the bottom of the roof round pieces and then a half moon crescent shape downwards and then a round piece again, etc. So these roofs tend to have a very typical look, even if you look at them from a distance, and that's basically the look that I tried to imitate by sinking these E's inward a little bit and then raising the other one up again, kind of intermittently. Is that a word? I don't know. Anyway, you get the drift. I'm trying to make these roofs look vaguely Asian, even though they are made out of the letter E. And also that did include putting some full stops at the end of these roofs. I know I said I wouldn't use the full stop anymore, but for this one, just to have that detail when you look up close, I decided to put these at the end, just to at least imitate a little bit the decorations that you have at the end of these tiled roofs, because they're very, very decorated. I find in general even that while a lot of European architecture really focuses on the walls themselves and kind of leave the roofs with maybe just a few decorations, some railings and some dormers, Asian and Chinese architecture focuses much more on the roof. The roof is a much larger part of the general structure of the building and is much more detailed, whereas the lower sections of the building are much more simple, at least as far as detailing goes. So here too, I'll be spending most of my time on this building just trying to perfect the roof, and then the rest is basically just filling in it. Whoa, I just destroyed my whole setup. Anyway, the rest is just basically filling in everything else. I'm trying to reset up my pop filter and everything here in the meantime. I'm going to try to actually pay attention to the video. Shouldn't be too bad. But yeah, that is basically my general approach to this building. Now, something that I didn't really talk about, but which I think is relevant to point out as well, is that this building was mostly inspired by a building in Japan, actually. In Shinjuku Gyoen, which is a park in Shinjuku in Tokyo, there's a Taiwanese pavilion in the middle of the park, which is a really cool building to view the garden from. And it was actually gifted by Japanese people in Taiwan, I believe, but very much a Taiwanese style, more so than a Japanese style. And I liked the idea of having a building to view the garden from. It's much more of a Chinese sort of thing. But I think it works out really well for this habitat as well. This will be the main viewing platform to see the habitat from. It is right next to the shelter, which I did shelter a bit more with some extra rock work so the animals don't completely have to be in view. But yeah, I think right in front of this is where the animals will be spending most of their time, where the food will be delivered and things like that. So I think this would be a good viewing place to see the habitat from. A good place to see the animals and a good framing for the habitat as a whole, because the perspective that you have from here of the bridge and of all of the foliage around the place, I think looks really cool. So that's why I ended up putting this building here. And I just like the picture of looking at the garden in the distance with the pillars and decorations of the building that you're standing in the foreground. I think it provides this really cool foreground-background interaction that I really like. So that's something that I ended up going for with this building. And yeah, that's my general idea behind the placements and design of this building. I was also inspired by, in general, Taiwanese temples, but I can't really pin this down on anything specific. I have to say that really all I did was open up a Google Images tab and search Taiwanese temple and keep a bunch of images as reference for ideas to see, what the color scheme should be like, how I should detail it, things like that. I often get the question of what inspires me, where I get my ideas from, and honestly, a lot of it is really just Googling at random and seeing what you like, seeing what you can draw ideas from, and what you can base general structures on, because obviously I'm not an expert in Chinese architectures, and having references images, that's too many plural words, whether it really should have been singular anyway. Having these references images, why do I keep doing this? Having these reference images in the background can really help to try and get an idea of what you should do. Definitely not going to be perfectly, authentic, but at the end of the day, I'm just some dude in Belgium making zoos in a video game, so at some point, yeah, I suppose you do have to zoom out and kind of consider who you are and where you are, and that I really probably shouldn't worry as much about these things as I do sometimes. And as for the use of this building, I put some shops in it right now, but this is actually going to be a toilet building eventually, because I didn't want to put shops inside this building and make it too busy to look at the animals. So I think toilet is maybe a bit of a lame use for such a very large scale and detailed building, but I think it works out better in the context of this habitat. Not to mention that I don't think the animals would want queue lines for people eating burgers in front of their habitat, not to mention the smell. So yeah, that's something that I had to keep in mind. And also, in the grand scheme of this habitat, this building does fulfill the function of hiding the backstage areas. I won't be really building the backstage areas too much or showing it off on the time-lapse, but I did add a backstage area with electricity and water management and a keeper hut and all that kind of thing. I hope you don't hear my roommates in the background. And also, realistically, I think this would be the space where a holding area for the bears would be, where staff could bring the bears to an area with no views of the guests for care outside of opening times, which realistically you need to have in a zoo as well. And even though it's not part of the game, it's something that I at least want to feature to some extent to make it all feel a bit more realistic and a bit more like it could actually be real. Now I want to finish this video off with some random things that I found out about the Formosan Black Bears, because I thought it was interesting. Apparently they don't hibernate, they just go to lower areas in Taiwan. The total population of these guys is actually unknown. although they are endangered, and they are kind of a mascot of the country as well. They're really popular, and there are a bunch of different mascots of black bears for all kinds of organizations as well, which are really cute. I love how countries like China, Korea, Japan seem to love their animal mascots. Also, I grossly overestimated, I grossly underestimated just how much the difference between males and females would be, because the male black bears are really huge, or at least about human size, and then the females are really tiny. It's really weird to see that. Anyway, that's it for this video. I'm just going to leave you guys with some cinematic shots of the bears enjoying their habitat, and yeah, I guess I'll see you in the next Planet Zoo video when the full game comes out. Unfortunately, this park will be lost, so this footage is all that is saved of this habitat, but really I want to stress that in the end this has all been more of a practice run for me, and a way to try and get inspired about habitats and building zoos, and I might bring back some design ideas from these few beta builds into whatever I'll end up deciding to build in the full game. But yeah, it's been fun, I think, to work on these and to try and practice and get to know the game, and I will miss it in the next couple of weeks. So, thank you guys for watching, thanks Frontier for bringing out this beta, and I hope to see you in the next video in a few weeks of the full game. Bye guys!